Hi there and welcome back everyone. This is Jennifer McGuire and I'm thankful you've joined me. Now today I'm going to share with you a fresh spin on the good old-fashioned bridge card design. Now this is a fun card design because it's very dimensional, so the recipient can put it on display and it looks really cool. The design is easy. You can use whatever products you have. Nothing special is needed. And I'm going to show you several variations today. Although these cards have great dimension, when you take them out of the envelope, they do lay flat and nicely fit into an envelope. And I made sure all of my examples today fit into a traditional A2 envelope. Okay, so let's get started with my first example. It's actually the most complicated. I thought that would be the best to start with. So let's start by looking at the completed card. Here you can see when you take it out from an envelope, it pops up and you get this great dimension. There's actually a second layer in there, so the trees are set back a bit. And I even included a card on the back so it would have a place to hide your personal message. This card features the W+9 Neighbor stamp set. This is a new one, and I will use it on a second card later in this video. I'm really excited about this set because it's fun to have something besides flowers and such to color. These houses can be used for many different occasion cards. So today I'm going to use it for a thank you card and then later for a miss you card. So off screen I went ahead and colored a bunch of the houses and I cut them out by hand. There are coordinating dies available, but I decided today that I didn't want the white trim, so I just fussy cut them. I also colored a bunch of trees, and by the way, I stamped those and colored them sitting outside because it was a beautiful day, and then I did all of my cutting and came back to assemble the cards. Now this first card example will be a landscape card that'll be 4¼ inches tall and 5½ inches wide. To create this card, you need to start with a piece of cardstock that is 4¼ by 8 inches. On this piece, I will score at 1¼ inches and then again at 2½ inches. I recommend using a nice heavyweight cardstock for this. Okay, after I've scored those two lines, I'm going to rotate it and do the same from the other end, 1¼ inches and 2½. I'm using my score buddy and a bone folder to get a really nice score line. Now I'm going to fold along these score lines and really reinforce it well using the side of my bone folder. We're going to do a little zigzag fold on both sides. You'll see how this will stand up nicely on its own, and it'll also flatten nicely to go into an envelope. Okay, so now I want to decorate the background of this before we add the bridge that will go across the front. I wanted to add some soft clouds, so I'm using the Simon Says Stamp Clouds for Days stencil. There are many cloud stencils out there. I like this particular one because in the center there are individual clouds, so you have both options. I'm covering those with some used pieces of purple tape because I just want to use the border today. I have my life-changing brushes from Picket Fence, and also some W+9 ink. And what I'm doing is I'm starting on the stencil and dragging the ink off of the stencil. This will give me a nice soft blue highlight above this cloud border. You could use a darker ink if you want it to be more intense, but I was going for a super soft look. I started at the bottom and worked my way up to cover the entire piece. Today I decided to use my W+9 inks since I'll be using my W+9 stamps. I love W+9 inks. I used them for years, kind of forgot to use them, but I'm definitely going to be going back to them. As you'll see today, they have some really beautiful colors. And it's the formula of ink that I like so much that dries to a beautiful, even look. All right, so there we have our background. Now it's time to create our bridge. Now your bridge piece needs to be 5½ inches wide. You'll see it fits nicely across that. Really doesn't matter how tall, you can make it as tall as you want, but you want it to be 5½ inches wide. I'm going to make a grass piece out of this bridge. So I'm just going to cut a line. You could use some sort of hill border die, but I thought I'd save time just by cutting it freehand. I'm then going to use my Copic markers to color it. Now, I will tell you, I am not a Copic marker expert. I'm nowhere near it, but I wanted to show you how I created this grass because I felt like it was a pretty fast and easy method. I started with my lightest green and made sure I put a lot of the marker down so that I could get a very saturated paper. I then went in with a darker green, and I put a heavy line at the top and then put little dots, making sure they were mostly focused towards the top edge. I then went over that with a medium green, adding more dots. And that kind of blends it a bit. But the trick to this is I went back over all of it with that lightest green and put another heavy layer down. And that kind of smooths it out and makes it look like a super fast grassy hill. There are many ways to do this, and some would probably be better, but I felt like this was pretty quick and it gave decent results. Once I finished this, I used a little bit of adhesive tape to adhere all my houses and tree to that bridge, that grassy bridge. I didn't put a lot of adhesive because I wanted to be able to move them around, and later I'll add more adhesive to make sure they stay put. Now it's hard to see in this photo, but there is a second bit of grass set back a little bit, another little bridge that's inside. This adds a second layer of dimension. For this, you need a piece that is 3.5 inches wide, and you score it 1/4 inch from each end. It doesn't matter how tall it is. Now I'm going to fold at both of those scored lines, and we have this tiny little bridge that will fit inside of our bridge card. And we can make it so it's set back a little bit, so we have another layer of trees. So I cut that again as a little grassy hill cut. So again, you could use a border die if you want to. And then I did the same technique to create the grass on this too. Notice that this piece is taller than the other, so that it'll peek out from behind the first one. So that'll go on the inside there, and it will pop up when we open our card. And this one will go on the front. So on this smaller one, I'm adding a couple trees, again, just using a light bit of dry adhesive so that later I can go back and add some stronger adhesive, because I will move things around as I sort around with the card. As you can see, this bridge card design is great for creating scenes, but I have other options that I'll show you in a bit. Next, let's go ahead and stamp our sentiment before we assemble our card. I'm stamping the greetings from the neighborhood stamp set with Altenew Obsidian Black ink, which is a great, nice, dark, crisp black ink for sentiments. Now the second part of my sentiment is very long, and I wanted to make sure I had it straight and centered. And this is a trick I like to do. I just took a piece of clear plastic and put it over my card. I'm going to ink up my stamp and stamp onto the clear plastic. If I'm happy with the results, I can go ahead and stamp it on my card. And you can easily wipe the ink off of that plastic. So this is a great way to test out the position of a stamp before you stamp it on your actual card, and it saved me many times. Now I'm using Lawn Fawn 1/4 inch double-sided tape and putting it onto the 2 small flaps of our inner bridge. So you can see it's right on the front of the flaps. And I'm going to glue one end right here between these 2 score lines on the left. It really doesn't matter where you put it there. I'm trying to center it just so it's kind of spaced out evenly in the front of the card. So now I'm going to take the other end and put that flap right between the 2 score lines on the other side. So again, I'm trying to make it center, and I'll show you another way to do this later in the video. So there you have this fun pop-up piece inside of your bridge card too. You could skip that layer if you wanted to. And now I'm going to take my trees, and I'll add a little bit of Gina K Connect liquid adhesive that's super strong, and add that onto our grass. Now before I add our bridge piece to the front, I'm going to add my little houses and trees with that liquid adhesive also, since I'm happy with how they're positioned. And finally, we can glue our bridge piece down. I'm just putting liquid adhesive on the outer edges, about the outer inch of our bridge piece. You could use double-sided tape here if you want. And you're just going to position that right across your card, making sure that the ends of the bridge line up with the ends of your card. I gave that a few minutes to dry, and then I like to dance the piece back and forth, kind of working the creases, and that helps with making sure it pops up nicely when you open your envelope. To finish it off, I added some mini glossy accents to the windows. And by the way, that neighborhood stamp set even comes with little flower window boxes that you can put on your houses, and little bushes and fence. It's so much fun to create a scene. Now for the back of my card, I created a 3 by 4¼ inch mini note card that I'm going to glue onto the back of our little bridge card. Inside of this card, I have written a personal message. Normally, I just like to write on the back of the bridge card, but some people like to have a flap to hide the message, so I wanted to show you that that was an option. So let's take a look at the completed card. You can see how it flattens nicely to go in an envelope. Then when you take it out of the envelope, it pops up to show all of that dimension. This is one of those that you hope the recipient will keep on display since it stands up so nicely. And of course, you have a spot to write your personal message on the back. And by the way, I only put 1 extra layer of dimension back there with the trees. You could put 2 in there if you wanted to, or you can skip it entirely. But I really like how it creates a lot more dimension and really doesn't take much time. And then finally, I wanted to show you how you can easily flatten the card down and then fit it nicely into an envelope. And there's actually very little bulk to it. Okay, now it's time for a portrait card. So this one is 5½ inches tall and 4¼ inches wide. And this time, instead of cutting a piece of cardstock to act as the bridge across the card, I'm using die cuts to stretch across. This is the W+9 Welcome Home stamp set. I've had this one sitting on my desk since I bought it. I have been wanting to use it, and I'm excited to finally do so. There are all these different wreath images you can layer together to create different looks. I'll also use some sentiments from it. I wanted to quickly show you how I created the wreath. I'm using various colors of W+9 inks. These are all green colors. And you really can layer these however you want. I found that if I changed the ink color between each layer, I was able to create something that has the look of lots of dimension. And by the way, if you're looking for a nice green ink, the first one I used here is W+9 Beanstalk. And then that bluish green color I used is Ocean Drive. Those are great colors. Here's a closer look at the final wreath, and I did cut it out by hand when I was done. Okay, next let's create our card base. This time I'm starting with a piece of cardstock that is 5½ inches tall and 5¾ inches wide. I will score at 3/4 inch and 1½ inches from both ends. So here you can see 3/4 inch and then 1½ inch. After I've scored those lines, I can go ahead and fold them as I did before, giving us a little zigzag look on both sides. By the way, this cardstock is Simon's Stamp Sea Glass cardstock. Okay, next I wanted to add some interest to the inside of the card, so I used the W+9 Stitched Ironworks die, which I used several times in this video. It is a gorgeous die. It creates this fun pattern with faux stitching. I cut it from white cardstock and I'm putting on the inside of my card, and this piece is 2¾ inches wide and 5½ inches tall. I also cut 2 thin strips of My Favorite Things Summer Splash cardstock, and I put adhesive on the back of that and then put them right against these fold lines, just for a little bit of definition since this is a very simple card. At least it's simple compared to the first card we did. I also created a die-cut banner using an older Simon Says stamp die set that happens to be discontinued. I'm sorry about that, but I will link below to a Lawn Fawn die that is very similar. I went ahead and glued that onto our wreath, and this is the piece that will stretch across the front of our card and form the bridge. Okay, next I needed a sentiment to go on this. I couldn't decide between the thanks or the hello from the W+9 basic greeting die set. So I die cut both and I'm putting them over the card just so I can imagine what it would look like. And I decided to go with the hello. And by the way, these dies are from the W+9 basic greeting die set, which I've used many times over the past few years. It has the dies hello, thanks, smile, and friend. And they just seem to work with lots of different cards. So I die cut hello 3 times from white cardstock and glued them together for some dimension. Now it's time to glue our bridge down. This is what I like to do. I like to flatten the card. You can see how on the left the piece is folded and on the right it's stretched out, because this is what it'll look like when it's in the envelope, when it's completely flattened. So I'm putting strong liquid adhesive on the tips of my banner. It barely stretches across as a bridge, but it does work. So I put just the adhesive on the tips, and I'm going to flatten the card to add it. You'll see I first press it down on the left flap, and then I'll press it down on the right flap, and I'll hold it there just to make sure that it stays put as it dries. And there you can see how we formed a bridge out of our die cuts. Okay, after I've done that, I can add our Hello die cut on top. Again, I recommend strong adhesive with these since there's really not much holding them all together. And using tweezers is really helpful in positioning your die cuts perfectly without getting your fingers in the way. I also white heat emboss sentiments that say, "Thanks so much for your kindness." And those are from that same welcome wreath stamp set. I glued those right on to the inside of the card. I created a top folding note card that is 2 3/4 inches wide and 5.5 inches tall, and I'm gluing that to the back of my card. You could instead, once again, write your message directly on the back of the card. It's nice to have either option when creating a bridge card like this one. Okay, so let's look at the completed card. Here is what it looks like when you take it out of the envelope. And you can see how it pops up nicely, so you have that bridge card design. Now this one has that big card attached to the back, so it kind of leans back on that when you stand it. If you wanted to make it stand upright completely, just skip the card on the back and just make your greeting right there written on the back of the bridge card itself. Here's a closer look at the wreath. I did add some light blue colored gemstones to it just for a little bit of sparkle. And I really like that faux stitched ironwork die background in there. It adds a little bit of interest and is just a really classy look. To fit it in the envelope, I collapse the side on the left and stretch out the folds on the right, and it slides in perfect. Okay, now it's time for another example. This is like the last one, but a completely different look, and I'm going to do it in both the landscape and portrait design. For these, I'm using the new W+9 Thinking of You stamp set. I like stamp sets like this because they build together, the images build together to create an artsy look, which is something I like, but I'm not good at making on my own. I like that W+9 puts circles around the images that layer together on the packaging to make it easy. I'm using my Misty stamping tool, but you can use an acrylic block if you prefer. I've put some white cardstock in there, and I'm stamping the outline of the flowers with black ink. You can see the artsy look of this. It's kind of these sketchy lines that are super cool. So notice that I'm stamping it towards the top of one piece of cardstock. I rotate it and I stamp it on the bottom. That way I can create a bunch of these flowers at once, so I can make multiple cards. Here are the different colors of W+9 ink I'll use on this card. And I'm also throwing in Hero Arts Bubblegum ink. The W+9 Sweet Gelato, Sweet Nectar, and Beanstalk are some of my favorites, and you'll see those colors on this card. So now I go through and I stamp the first layer. So this is one that's very easy to line up, and it's not supposed to line up perfectly to give you that artsy look. But because I'm doing a bunch at once, you can see how fast it is to have the Misty stamping tool. I stamp, rotate, stamp again, and do that on several pieces to create lots of flowers. By the way, that first color was Bubblegum from Hero Arts. This beautiful like peach color here is Sweet Nectar from W+9. The green here is Beanstalk, which is just a great green ink. I wanted to add a little shadow to that green, so I'm coming in with Hero Arts Field Green inks and a sponge dauber, just to dab a bit of that darker green color on part of this stamp. And then I stamp it on top of our first stamping, and that gives a two-tone look. Doing this extra step of adding a little more of a darker color takes a few minutes, but is definitely worth it in the end. After I did all the layer stamping, I went ahead and cut them out and check out all these beautiful flowers that I can arrange in many different ways. On this card, I'm also using the W+9 Onward and Upward die. The die that's in my left hand is what I'll use, but I wanted to show you that this die set coordinates with the Onward and Upward stamp set. I'm not using that stamp set today, but the messages in there are fantastic and would really work well with the bridge card design I'm about to do. Now, the cool thing about this die is it not only cuts, but it makes an impression in the cardstock. I'm going to freeze this here. See that impression around the outside edge? I thought that was such a nice touch. So I'm going to make 2 cards, one where I leave it like this and one where I foil my die. There are several machines on the market that will allow you to foil with a die. I'm using the Spellbinder's Glimmer Hot Foil system. Now I'm going to use it very quickly in this video. However, I have a full tutorial video that I will link to on the top right here and also in my description below in case you're interested. You just plug in your machine, let it get good and hot, lay your die face up with the cutting edge up, then take some glimmer foil with the pretty side face down, put your cardstock on top, the 2 glimmer plates on top of that, and then you push the timer button on the bottom left. Once it stops flashing, it's about a minute, you can take the plates out of your machine, they easily slide out, and then you run them through your die cut machine. I'm running them through my Spellbinder's Platinum 6 here, and I just run it through kind of slowly and I go back and forth a couple times. This adds the heat and the pressure to transfer that special foil onto your cardstock. So we'll have a wide line of foil where that impression part of the die is, and a thin line of foil where the cutting edge of the die is. Now I could use the die to cut this out when I'm done, but I decided to use my scissors to cut it out so that I could keep both lines of foiling. Okay, now that we have some of our pieces ready, let's create both of our card bases. I'm making 2 cards here. The first is like the first card we created with the houses, and we're starting with a piece of cardstock that is 4 1/4 by 8 inches, and we're scoring 1 1/4 inch and 2 1/2 inches from both ends. We can then fold along those score lines to create our bridge card. So this will be a landscape card that's 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, and you'll see that that die fits perfectly across it to create the bridge. Okay, now let's create our portrait card. This is 5 3/4 inches wide, 5 1/2 inches tall, and I'm scoring 3/4 of an inch and 1 1/2 inches from both ends. This is like the wreath card that I just showed you. After I score along the fold lines, you can see how that die stretches across nicely on this particular design too, and it forms the perfect bridge. By the way, I should mention the super light pink cardstock I'm using is Basil Rose Quartz. It's new to me and the perfect soft pink. I also wanted to use that faux stitch Ironworks die cut for the background. So I die cut it from the same cardstock, and I'm cutting 3/4 of an inch off each edge. These 2 pieces will be glued to the outside flaps of our card and they'll fit perfectly. Then what's left over in the middle will actually fit perfectly in the middle or the inside of our card. So we now have this faux stitching on the background. After gluing all of these pieces in place, it's time to glue our assembled bridge onto it. So I have that die cut with the flowers on it, and I also stamped Thinking of You from that same W+9 Thinking of You stamp set. On the back, just on the outer edge, on both sides, I'm putting some strong double-sided tape, and then I will position this across as the bridge. So what I like to do is flatten the card. So when I flatten the card, I fold the left side and I flatten out the right side. And then I hold it down as I glue this down. I like to keep it flat, so I'm just holding it down with some tape. And now I can take my bridge and put it across. So I line it up, centering it across the card. And my tape is on the back left and the back right, and so to glue to the flaps on the left and the right. I also only temporarily adhered all of those flowers in case I wanted to move them. Good thing I did because you can see the leaf is hanging off the left and would prevent it from fitting in the envelope. So now I can go back and use strong liquid adhesive to glue all of those flowers in place. So let's look at this completed card before we move on to the other. So here we take it out of the envelope and you can see how it's flat in the envelope and then pops up nicely when you take it out. I did also add some soft yellow pearls to the little centerpiece of this card. But besides that, I kept it pretty simple. This time I plan to write the sentiment directly on the back of my bridge card. Personally, that's how I normally would do it, but I know many people like to have a card attached to it so you can have that traditional card feel. In looking closer, you can see the impression that that die made on that white die cut centerpiece. Gives a nice finished edge, and on my other card I'll use the one where we did the foiling. I like when you can use a die for more than one look. So with this example, I didn't add that second layer of a bridge behind it like we did on our last examples. I decided to keep these a little bit more simple, but you could definitely add that extra layer. Now here's our landscape version of the card. I assembled it just like I did the other one. This one does have more dimension to it. It pops up more. So there is more room for extra layers if you want to add them inside. And looking closely at that white label die cut in the center, you can see the detailed foil edge that I did using that glimmer foil system. Took an extra few minutes, but it's definitely worth it. Okay, I have one last card that I'm going to go through very quickly and really just show you how to add a second layer to a portrait card, like we did on our first one, but this is a tall card. So you can see the second layer trees in there. For that second layer, that second bridge inside, you need a piece of cardstock that is 3/4 inches wide. It doesn't matter how tall. I did about 1 inch tall. And you're going to score 1/4 inch from each end. Once you fold across this, you have a bridge that will go on the inside of your card for that second layer. Now off screen, I created a 5.5 tall by 4.25 inch wide bridge card, just like we did on our other examples in this video. And I added the background with the faux stitched Ironworks die cut. After I have that assembled, I can put the strong adhesive on the flaps of this inside bridge. And here's how I like to add this. I put it on the right-hand side first, and this is between those two score lines, as you can see here. Once I have that in place, and I kind of do it halfway between those two score lines, I flatten the card out, and you can see the adhesive there on the left flap is facing up, and I fold over the left edge of the card to press onto that adhesive, and there we have our inside bridge. Now the outside bridge is very simple. I added some sentiments and also those stamped and colored pieces that I had left over. That hello sentiment is from the welcome wreath stamp set that I showed you earlier. But the I miss you sentiment is from this W+9 butterfly mandala stamp set. That's absolutely beautiful. And I thought those two sentiments worked nicely with these images. This assembled bridge piece is 4.25 inches wide. It really doesn't matter how tall it is. So now we can glue this across the front of our card. Again, we're going to put strong tape on the outside edge of this bridge. You could use liquid adhesive if you prefer. Now to adhere this to our card, I'm going to press it down onto the left flap and then line it up on the right flap. And it stretches across, making the perfect bridge. And behind that is another hidden bridge where we can add more dimension. Every once in a while, you want to flatten your card left and right just to make sure the folds are all working nicely. Now we can add our little trees with strong adhesive to that inner bridge, the one that's set back a little bit. Okay, after finishing my card, I put it in an envelope so you can see what it looks like when it comes out. It pops up and we have the 2 layers to our scene. It's actually a pretty simple card to put together, especially since I used some leftover pieces. I did add glossy accents to the windows once again, just for a little bit of shine. And I really like that faux stitching on the background. That was a lot faster to add than inking the clouds, so it's a nice, quicker option. And once again, with this design, I plan to write my sentiment on the back, but you could add the card like I did on my earlier example if you prefer. So there you have it, a fresh spin on the traditional bridge card design. I hope you'll give this a try because this is one of those designs that you can use with a variety of stamps or dies. If you are interested in the particular products I used today, I link them below in my description, but you can also go to my blog where I have a lot more information for you. I even have the dimensions there so you can just print them out. In the middle are a couple other fun fold card videos that you might like. Always, I'll say it every time, I appreciate you spending time with me. Thank you so much for watching this long video, and we'll see you again soon.